I, like many of us, have been hearing the notion that babies need to just cry it out my whole life. But now that I'm approaching my due date, I figured the easiest way to explain this would be to just make a video about it. So today that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about why modern research supports the idea that crying it out is harmful and outdated parenting advice. So if you have people in your own life who need to hear this, who keep pestering you about not letting your child cry it out, feel free to give this a share to them. Also, just a quick reminder, my second novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, which is a gothic horror novel, is set to come out in June 2025. So make sure you are subscribed to my email newsletter so that you'll be alerted as soon as it's out. You can find that at dranayudin.com. But without further ado, let's talk about the research on letting kids cry it out. So in the 20th century, there was a behavioral psychologist named John Watson, who was at the time president of the American Psychological Association. And he believed that showing babies too much affection would coddle them and make them dependent on their caregiver. For example, a government pamphlet at the time advised parents that a baby over 6 months old should be taught to sit quietly in the crib, otherwise he might need to be constantly watched and entertained by the mother, a serious waste of time. So given that this was the kind of parenting advice given at the time, it's not altogether surprising why older generations are very staunch in this viewpoint. It was really drilled into them as the correct parenting method. And look, Watson contributed some really important insights to the field of psychology. However, I wouldn't necessarily trust his track record with babies, considering the little Albert experiment he did where he trained a 9-month-old to fear a furry white rat did not end very happily. As it turns out, Watson did not decondition the baby, and the baby then went on to generalize his fear to other furry white objects in general, and eventually little Albert passed away at age 6 due to hydrocephalus, which has nothing to do with Watson's experiment, but again, I keep thinking that baby deserved better treatment while he was alive. So maybe back then psychologists didn't have the most compassionate approach to treating babies. Now, why do modern psychologists staunchly disagree with Watson's take? First of all, you have to understand that babies cannot independently regulate their emotions. When a baby's crying, that's how they communicate an unmet need. And a lot of people take it personally when their baby's crying or can't be consoled, but it's really not personal. Babies don't know how else to communicate something that they want. They're not trying to manipulate or punish the parent. They're just trying to express, again, an unmet need. And babies are completely helpless. They can't do anything. They can't even roll over. So they need their caregiver to meet that unmet need for them. Often that need is hunger or a diaper that needs changing or feeling sleepy. But sometimes simply being out of the womb is scary enough. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're a fetus inside the womb, and all you've ever known is a warm, snug ocean. Then suddenly you are expelled into the world where it's suddenly scary and foreign. The newborn stage is sometimes called the 4th trimester or the external womb because newborns are extremely vulnerable compared to other species that come straight out of their mom's hoo-ha, ready to stand and play and all of that. Human newborns are born earlier developmentally speaking than other species because we have very large heads when we're born and small pelvises for the mom to push out. So they gotta be born before their heads get too big, but they're still extremely, extremely fragile at that age. And so that's why babies need things like to be swaddled and shushed because it reminds them of the womb, because in a sense, newborns are still experiencing the 4th trimester. And as a baby, once you're out of the womb, you don't yet have the cognitive capacity to understand what's happening. From time to time, all you know is that the world just feels bad. And when something feels bad to babies, it feels all bad. It feels extremely scary. It feels like the world is bad, they are bad, mom is bad, everybody is bad, because they don't yet have the ability to differentiate between self and the external world either. Now, when an adult hasn't progressed past this stage developmentally, this is what we sometimes refer to in psychology as splitting. Sometimes the world is just all bad, and other times the world is all good. Things are in either one state or another, and the adult is sort of unable to sit in the duality. It's been theorized by psychodynamic psychologists that this is actually caused by a lack of caregiver warmth or attunement during infancy. In other words, if you don't soothe your baby, there's a chance they might never progress out of this, oh my god, the world is all bad, everything is all bad, I want to go right back into the womb right now state of mind. And you might think that letting a baby cry it out is just exposure therapy or teaching them to stress tolerance, but it's actually not, because the ability to self-regulate is developed gradually, and infants, by and large, can't do it on their own. They learn how to self-regulate by being regulated by their primary caregiver. So when they're in the crib crying and crying for hours, it's not that eventually they learn how to tolerate their own distress. Rather, at some point, they just become numb. For example, think about a time when you were really, really inconsolable about something that had upset you, and you cried and cried for hours, and eventually you were so exhausted that you just fell asleep. That wasn't distress tolerance, was it? It wasn't you soothing yourself. You needed something to bring you comfort, but at some point, your body just kind of tired out. That is for babies what distress feels like all the time. They don't yet have that capacity to self-soothe. And when you put it that way, doesn't it seem incredibly cruel to make babies just cry it out? In just a moment, I'm going to get to exactly the cascade of negative health outcomes that happens to babies when left to cry it out. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Zocdoc. Zocdoc is a free app and website designed to help you find high-quality in-network providers, pick the one you want, and instantly book an appointment. They have over 100,000 providers in a wide range of specialties and in-network with a wide range of insurances. I used Zocdoc a lot when I was still living in the US. It was kind of my go-to for finding an in-network provider and securing an appointment quickly, especially when I was living in a new city. Instead of needing to call up different providers, wait months and months for the next appointment, and then find out that they don't even take your insurance once you get there, Zocdoc just makes the process much smoother. And as someone who currently lives in Europe now, I see how messed up the healthcare system in the US is even more than I did when I was there. And I think any tools to make this process smoother for people are a lifesaver, especially since Zocdoc is at no cost to you, the patient. So what I love about Zocdoc is the ease of finding a healthcare provider in your area who also takes your insurance. You can also see the reviews for different providers. You can choose the most convenient appointment time, which is often within just 24 to 72 hours. And once the office approves your appointment, you're good to go. Visit my Zocdoc link below to easily book local top-rated doctors who can see you quickly. Thank you so much to Zocdoc, and let's get back to why letting babies cry it out is not healthy. And then the second thing you gotta understand is that letting babies just cry it out has harmful effects on their development. Starting off with the biological and neurological issues that can come up, it's well established that caregiver behavior can turn certain genes on or off in infants. For example, maternal touch has been associated with more growth. When mothers don't show their infants physical touch, DNA synthesis drops, growth hormone decreases. Also, when children are in a constant state of stress because they're not being soothed, that disrupts their brain development. In those moments when they're crying and crying without being soothed, a lot of cortisol is being released in their brains. And cortisol in excess can kill neurons. Because infants' brains are supposed to be undergoing a large amount of growth during that time, just imagine how many opportunities for development are being missed. Prolonged stress can also cause long-term stress disorders, for instance, an improperly functioning vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the part of the nervous system, and it is responsible for calming you down during fight or flight. So if the vagus nerve is not properly functioning, that can lead to things like hypervigilance, an inability to calm down during stress as an adult. And then there are also attachment issues. When caregivers comfort their babies, those babies go on to develop secure attachment. Secure attachment means that a child has learned that the world is a safe place, that their primary caregivers and primary attachment figures are people they can trust. They learn that by being soothed when they're in distress. And attachment styles can be changed if you work at it really hard, but otherwise they are pretty stable across time. So by refusing to soothe babies, you might be setting them up for a lifelong inability to trust their primary relationships, a lifetime of insecure attachment. For example, if you force a baby to cry it out, you are basically forcing independence earlier than it's developmentally appropriate. And studies have found that this actually leads to more dependence later on, not more independence, compared to children who were soothed as infants. Which to me kind of sounds like the concept behind an insecure, anxious attachment style, which is when you learn very early on, okay, my caregiver cannot be relied on, cannot be trusted to comfort me when I need it. And so you try to seek that attachment all the time through sort of clinging, insecure behaviors. On the other hand, caregivers who respond to their baby before they start crying actually end up having more independent children. And then also when you neglect an infant, or really anyone for that matter, it can lead to something called learned helplessness, which is essentially when a person learns nothing I can do will have an effect on my environment, so I might as well just give up. I also wonder if this might be related to an insecure avoidant attachment style, where babies turn into adults who are kind of indifferent, who don't really have an interest in relationships or actively want to avoid them, because again, they learned early on that their most primary attachment figures cannot be trusted. They can't actually rely on them to meet their needs. Some other considerations: caregiver responsiveness has also been associated with greater intelligence, empathy, self-regulation, and social competence, and it's been negatively correlated with aggression and depression. So I hope that gives you a sense of why letting babies just cry it out is probably not a very good idea. This is not meant to shame anyone who did this as a parent. Like I said, I understand most parents were doing what professionals instructed them to do at the time, and the science is always evolving. And that's the beautiful part, that we're always hopefully chipping away at getting closer and closer to the truth. But hopefully now you understand why it is not recommended that modern day parents let their kids just cry it out. Because sure, your kids may have turned out fine, but imagine how much better the next generation could be. Hope this was helpful. See you soon.